Forward TV. The world is thinking.
In the last few years, numerous scholars from a variety of fields have realized how fashion is a unique lens through which to gain a new understanding of cultures, as well as the mechanisms regulating cultural and economic production in the past and in the present. In one way or another, the questions that recent scholarship and the courses we offer in the concentration ask are very simple ones, namely, what is fashion? Why does it seem to matter so much? Why do people hate it or love it? How is that fashion has the power to affect the way we perceive ourselves and the way others perceive and see us? How does fashion transform and brand the identities of cities and even entire countries? Underlying all the recent scholarly attention that has been given to fashion is the intent of stripping it of its apparent light and frivolous reputation and put in its place a serious investigation that seeks to uncover the many layers that its surface conceals. The study of fashion has involved a series of disciplines and has had the effect of expanding the boundaries of those disciplines. It was as, in fact, some scholars felt the traditions of their own academic fields and expertise were too tight a fit. Indeed, for disciplines such as history, literature, sociology, psychology, semiotics, etc., fashion has added a new dimension and breadth to the study of culture. Art, economic and political transformation, a new language of self and identity. Fashion is a twin and sometimes contradictory dimension, being both personal and public, while at the same time dealing with reality and fantasy. These two dimensions go side by side. Fashion, in fact, is not only clothing and accessories, but also gestures, behavior, ways of thinking and feeling, and taste, as Guy Trebay has often reminded us in his wonderful articles in the New York Times. The complex mechanisms that is at the heart of fashion needs to be located in relation to time and space. The catwalk, the street, a business environment, schools, clubs, parties, and so forth. The desire to look good, to seduce, to make an impact on an audience, whether by individuals, political leaders, or their spouses, is testimony to the power fashion has to impact reality and choices. Desire is multifaceted. For some, it is a desire to conform. For others, it is an opposite desire to be different, to express what is pertinent to one person and not another. Fashion at times does just that, as the work of Gabi Asfour and his partners in Anna Sui eloquently shows. It is then with great pleasure that I would like to introduce our speakers tonight. I start with Gabi. Gabi Asfour is part of the fashion design collective 3S4, established in 2005 with fellow designer Ange and Adi. Beginning in '98 as a foursome, S4, an organic reference to the group's distinctive creative chemistry, evolved into 3S4 after the departure of the fourth member in 2005. Innovation through collaboration drives the creative trio. 3S4 consistently creates silhouettes inspired by the natural world, the anatomy of the human body, plants and animals, whose graceful forms exemplify perfection in design, balance and motion. Blurring the lines where fashion meets art, the three employ a multidimensional approach to cut and construction to create collections that redefine classical tailoring. Adi, Ange and Gabi won the Eccodomani Fashion Grant in 2001, and their work has since been included in some of the world's most prestigious museums, including the Metropolitan Museum Costume Institute in New York, as well as the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and Musée Galliera in Paris. Last year, 3S4 was one of 10 finalists of the Council of Fashion Designer Vogue Fashion Fund. Their collection can be found in such stores as Barney in New York, Colette in Paris, in Athens, and many other cities. Now I go to Anna Sui. Her design inspiration from such sources as Victorian cowboys, Warhol superstars, and Finnish textile prints. mixing vintage styles with her current cultural obsessions. She grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, where she decided to become a fashion designer at age 4. After studying at Parsons School of Design in New York for 2 years, Anna styled with her friend, the photographer Steven Meisel, and designed for several sportswear companies before launching her first collection in 1980. In 1991, she premiered her first runway show. The following year, she opened her first flagship store on Green Street in Soho. In the 1990s, she expanded in the Far East and launched cosmetics, fragrance, shoe, and accessory licenses. Today, she has 32 boutiques in 5 countries, and her collection is sold in 300 stores in more than 30 countries. Guy Trebay writes for the New York Times style section, where he covers fashion and style with a distinctive voice and sharp wit and deep intelligence. Previously, Guy covered New York City and its many diverse communities for the Village Voice and was recognized with numerous awards, including the Deadline Club Front Page Award and the Pulitzer Prize nomination. Guy's many subjects include our celebrity-fixated age and, of course, the emergence of fashion as a major cultural force. Many of his Village Voice pieces are collected in his book, In the Place to Be, and have been included in several anthologies. In addition to the Times and the Voice, he has written for the New Yorker, Details, Vibe, Condé Nast, Traveler, and Harper's. So, welcome, and we can start our conversation. Okay. I would like to start from economics and how the current economic situation is affecting the fashion industry. I will start with Guy, and I will ask, is fashion a luxury we can no longer afford?
I'm disposed to say no, it is not, and it's an inevitability. Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly in straitened times the shape of fashion changes, but I don't see the interest in it altering in any way. Mm-hmm. Fashion as fashion, you know, the kind of movement of ideas through clothes. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, I want to separate it from the luxury goods business, I suppose. Mm-hmm.
I agree with Guy. I think that fashion is kind of like a secret vocabulary that people use to express themselves, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a luxury. I think that, I mean, if you consider something like punk fashion or grunge fashion or street fashion, those are just secret signals to each other to let people know that I identify with this, I believe in that. I think that's truly fashion. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that it's the opposite, because all of a sudden we have companies like H&M, Uniqlo, mm-hmm. That have opened up, people like Karl Lagerfeld and even Madonna to come in and offer it at an affordable price. So all of a sudden it's very accessible. So I think, in a time like this, the opposite happens. Mm-hmm. Like luxury fashion is offered to everybody, mm-hmm. which is really refreshing.
In another way, what has always interested me is the part of fashion. I've always had the idea that fashion isn't clothes, mm-hmm. and it's all the messagery, it's all the community, it's all of the signals that you referenced in your introduction. That the inevitability of that is what's really sort of super compelling about fashion. And the market is going to go up and down, and people are going to buy or not buy, or buy expensive things or less expensive things. And it's been an interesting thing to watch, kind of as high-low became institutionalized, to see the high end of fashion, which formerly wouldn't stoop to deal with H&M, see that there was a kind of conversation going on that it wanted to be a part of, in a monetary as well as a cultural way. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's also a pendulum, too. Like it gets so high that the only thing that's going to look new and edgy is the total extreme.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Yeah.
And I think that's what fashion is. It's extremes both, back and forth, back and forth. And if you look at fashion, it kind of always does that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as a designer, you would have to challenge yourself with something very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. Or, challenge yourself with something super commercial that's going to work with a company like H&M. And mm-hmm. all of a sudden, then you become interesting as a designer. Mm-hmm. The in-between is kind of lost. Mm-hmm. There's no interest in it.
So do you think that even during this economic crisis, then fashion still matters? And
mm-hmm. It's very exciting, actually. It pushes mm-hmm. fashion to its fullest potential. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that fashion portrays economic status of a person, a city, or a country? I think you were interested in.
Of course, I think whatever you wear is whatever you are. There's no way to hide behind it. So if you're a bum, you're a bum. So whatever you wear is.
And I know plenty of bums who dress really well, though.
Yeah, I think so. But if you want to dress in grey, then that's what you are.
What about a country? What about a country?
For sure. I mean, you can tell a city from the style that it has, for sure. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. If we compare New York to Los Angeles, there's a difference, in taking care of yourself, when you leave the house, or, leaving the house or not leaving the house is the same situation.
But that's slightly what I mean about fashion, like not capital F fashion, but fashion as this global currency. Gabi earlier on referred to it as the fastest growing disease, did you say?
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's happening in this very exciting way, regardless of economic changes, regardless of anything. And also it's kind of like the global dispersion of it right now is what I'm very caught up in as an observer. How the idea of fashion, formalized as fashion, is now everywhere. Yeah. Right. As it used to be kind of a very Western thing.
Exactly.
But I think because of the internet, then everybody has access to the same information. So all of a sudden, you don't need to be able to afford or have access to Vogue or a special magazine to be able to know what's going on. So you can be in Timbuktu and go on the internet and you'll find out what's going on. So all of a sudden you can tap onto whatever the person in New York or in Paris is tapping onto. Then all of a sudden...
And they will.
Yeah, of course. Because everybody's interested in culture.
They want to look.
It's the will to find that out. It's totally baffling to me.
I think the most sought about thing in the world is culture. Everybody wants to be sophisticated, so there's no way around it. So everybody wants to know what the highest thing in the world is. So everybody's going to tap into it.
Let me move now to more specific questions regarding the relationship of fashion to politics and society. Now, I would like to know your opinion about this. Several studies of totalitarian regimes see fashion as a key factor in creating a strong sense of identity, both at a personal and national level. Does fashion do something similar in today's contemporary and democratized society? Perhaps we'll start with Anna this time.
I think if you look at, when you go to an airport nowadays, I think more and more you find that you cannot tell what country everyone is from because of this globalization, because of this internet information where everyone has the same influences. I think that more and more when the world became casual, when they let go of their traditional dress, their expected dress, everyone kind of looked towards casualness. So everybody looks like they're from California or something. It's like everything is sweat clothes and puff jackets and sportswear, sneakers. I think that suddenly we're in a completely different place than we've ever been in the history of time.
Yeah, I look at it more as there is a certain uniform that is international. Everybody in the world, like she said, in airports you find it the most because everybody wears the same colors. And we found out through our experimentation by doing a secondary line that these colors are the colors of the sky. It's blue, white, gray, and black. So it's kind of like how the sky changes. So it's kind of familiar colors. So these, and denim is the main color. Blue in all its shades is very accepted. So all of a sudden, instead of, a Mao Zedong uniform or, you have something that is really a uniform, and it's international, and it's very, very much there. You can go anywhere in the world, you'll find it.
What do you think? Being a traveler.
I feel like I'd have to grow an extra brain to answer that one. It's so complicated. So, I mean, I do have the feeling that everywhere you go, people do dress more or less the same, but the way that they dress the same has a lot to do with the spread of corporate capitalism more than anything else. And so it's kind of, rather than, you know, cultural or political identities, people now have this kind of globalized embrace of market as the god. You know, and sort of our idea went everywhere, and everyone's a part of it willingly or not. So that we're, you know, it's not that you wear the uniform of place; it's that you wear the uniform of this apparatus. Let's say, you know, this kind of, because it didn't, you know, the information didn't get out before, and also the goods didn't get out globally. So now everybody's tapping into the same, you know, kind of distribution networks, which are aggressively pursued, obviously, but mostly from the West. It isn't like everybody suddenly took up wearing saris or something in airports.
But so definitely blue jeans. Definitely.
Blue jeans for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere in the world you're going to find somebody wearing 5-pocket jeans in different versions.
Yeah.
But you remember the days when you had to dress up to take a plane? There was a time where you would put on a suit.
I think we should pretend not to remember that. For dating.
But it was a ritual.
It was not long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I like the idea that you started with this idea of the airport.
Yeah, that's where. I mean, that's kind of where everybody meets on the same plane. You know? On the plane, basically, they're going.
And you used to have to travel to get a certain designer or a certain brand. Like you'd have to go to the country of origin, where now it's in every country. And you go somewhere where you think you're going on holiday, and suddenly there's a Prada store, there's a this store and that store. It's just everywhere. So it's part of the globalization.
But sort of in advance of that, there was jeans and there were T-shirts, and then there were sort of, you know, basically that, when that became the uniform of the planet.
Yeah.
T-shirt, essentially, whereas I guess it had been other things before in different places.
But then there was French-style jeans, and there was California-style jeans, and vintage, you know, there was where now all that's readily available everywhere.
Well, now there's designer jeans, so then it's a whole other thing. Everybody wants to be.
But it's very funny how it works on like on some kind of time continuum, because like now we've cycled back to sad, kind of acid-washed gray type 70s jeans. But there are places that didn't really leave that yet. They're still.
Yeah. But then there's designers that are trying to do the acid wash.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So then let's turn on issues of urbanity and cities, because, you know, so when the airport, now let's go back to cities. Why do you think there is such strong competition among cities to become centers of fashion or global fashion capitals? Because there's still...
I think fashion represents culture. It's very much a reflection of culture. It represents sophistication in a culture, refinement in a culture. So, you know, to be a fashion capital, you know, automatically makes you a sophisticated cultural center. I look at it like this, I think.
But also means attracting...
Attracting all kinds of cultural, you know, outlets.
Like in an economic way or in a...
Both, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if the defining act now is to consume, you want to be, a city wants to be the most sophisticated consuming place. You know, you want to be at the pinnacle of the consuming pyramid, something like that. And so everybody's kind of vying for that. But it's also kind of being defeated at the same time, because then, you know, as I said earlier, this information is getting everywhere, so it's very hard to kind of hold on to get the lock on that. Then you have this kind of commutation, like sometimes it's New York, sometimes it's Paris, sometimes it's Milan. But it's really kind of migrated, you know, it's really moving globally a lot. And it'll be interesting to watch people, you know, adapt to that. You know, it's moving to Asia, and Asia, and Seoul, for example, super, not anybody's first choice for fashion capital, but in fact, in a lot of ways it is.
It's so stylish and
super.
so sophisticated. And again, it's because of the globalization. People have the information and the goods that they never had before. And certainly in the last 10 years, China, I think we've seen such an extreme change in the way people dress in China, and also that it's emerging as a fashion capital because all the manufacturing is shifting. So I think that we're going to see some drastic changes in the future, that wherever the manufacturing is going is where the centers are going to move to.
I can imagine when everybody's very stylish in China, what will happen in America or in France. But when everybody has access to style in China, that would be crazy, I think.
But still, do you think, I mean, you were mentioning different cities also connected with fashion weeks, right? I mean,
I just came back from
exactly.
New Delhi. In New Delhi, which until 1991, the Indian economy was a very isolationist one, and it was quite closed. The then finance minister liberalized the economy to a certain extent and started to allow imported goods. It's still rather difficult for multinationals to get in, but they're there. So I've been traveling in India more or less since then on a maybe twice yearly basis. When I first was traveling in India, you never saw anything that we would think of as fashion. Last week, I guess it was, I was in India. There are three competing fashion weeks at once, 2 in Delhi and 1 in Bombay. And, you know, the velocity of information exchange and adaptation is really kind of awe-inspiring because, you know, from a point at which you had to import everything. I mean, you had to really almost as contraband to get jeans or shampoo or hair products or what have you. Now everybody very, very quickly has kind of taken up the information, customized it locally, and then is representing it, is ready to bring it back to us. I mean, not only to us, to themselves, to represent themselves to themselves, which is, you know, it's super compelling. And there were mobs of people. And in the beginning, like the Indian fashion weeks were kind of a little highfalutin and invitation only, and now they're just absolutely, everybody wants to be a part of it. I mean,
they can attend, people can attend.
I mean, whether they can or not, they do. You know, they
Do you, I mean, who is showing in this fashion week? I mean, who are
in New Delhi, I mean, you know, there's a range of Indian designers. There's no Western designers. Do you mean by name? I mean, Rohit Bal and Tarun Tahiliani and Sunit Varma. I'm blanking some of the other names, but you know, quite a lot of them, and most of whom have a very, very thriving domestic market. But the interest in the West in this kind of, now we got what you had, you know, fashion, and we're working it out in our way, and we want to sort of bring it back in your direction and show you what we have done with it. It's to your China point.
So, for example, going back to the United States, I mean, I think you mentioned before Los Angeles, New York, can you see any difference?
Yeah,
this.
I think it has to do with the change of seasons, because in Los Angeles you have the same season all the time. So there's no need to change wardrobe drastically. But in New York you have a change of seasons, so you're going to need a winter coat at some point. So all of a sudden you're going to need heavier socks or a heavier shoe. So you're going to change, you know, your wardrobe. So the climate, you know, forces you to change wardrobe. But in LA you can be in flip-flops and t-shirts and, you know, and you can do that everywhere, you know, from your house to the mall to when you go out, it's the same thing. So there's no need for that kind of change. So I think a city like New York, you know, kind of requires it. So all of a sudden, the wardrobe in New York is completely different. It becomes, you know, very aware. In LA, it becomes very unaware. And I mean, nothing to say about one or the other, but this kind of awareness makes you aware of how you look when you step out of the house or when you do something. And the unawareness makes you unaware of how you look.
You sort of see the really true action, like the pure action of fashion, when like shoes happen to California. You know, California, you really didn't need shoes, and then, but the whole shoe idea, it's similarly like in India, it's not a shoe culture particularly. Yeah. There's every opportunity to be taking your shoes off or wearing a slip-on or off shoe. And now, you know, and you couldn't formally get, you know, a woman couldn't get a very stylish shoe there, and now that's fashion. I mean, that idea, there's no greater need now in LA or India than there was before.
Yeah. But nothing for or against, it's just the way it is. I think it's not like to say, oh, LA style is bad, it's just the way it is. It's not, you know, or India style is bad. But that's the way it is, it adapts to the climate.
What do you think?
Well, I feel that the LA style has permeated the world. I think that because of the casualness that everyone's taking up, even you see it in Japan where there's vintage stores that are just filled with T-shirts, old jeans. Like it just looks like LA vintage stores. Also in London, again, there used to be a very distinct style. Again, the casualness took over, and even in the department stores, like a lot of the fashion merchandise are all of that casual wear. I think that that's really something that became like a worldwide phenomenon. That Japan, I mean, you see so many blondes now, and like you're walking down the street and you think it's Pamela Anderson, but I mean, it's the look. That's the fashion.
And then people copy it in the Middle East also. So,
in which way?
You know, to be blonde and have the Pamela Anderson look.
What about, I mean, the Hollywood? Yeah, I mean, in Los Angeles, right? I mean, the weather, we said the weather, but perhaps other...
I mean, some dimensions of this as a cultural export are not so great. Some parts of the Pam Anderson look. But I mean, as I look out on this room, I couldn't say that it looks like a New York room particularly, or an LA room, or a something room, based on the way people are dressed. And it's really that, to me, in terms of the power of fashion, it's exactly that kind of, I don't have a word to say what this mesh is about, but the information has moved people into a common sphere, where it isn't so much regional or city-based or country-based, and it's a generally understood idea, and it's more about levels. You know, kind of I'm here and I'm pitching myself there or here.
But I think it also has to do with what makes sense, you know, in terms of internationally everyday life. So whatever city makes sense, which Los Angeles does, you know, in a way, if you see a housewife in Timbuktu or you see one in Jerusalem, they're going to look kind of similar inside their houses. But that makes sense because, you know, and then it relates to something like Los Angeles. That's how I look at it. It's not going to look like something like Paris, but more for that. But
there's this great Joan Didion essay where she wrote about shopping, I guess, in Vons or Ralph's or something in LA, and she was wearing a bikini. Of course, as she pushed her cart, and some older woman was, you know, shocked and horrified. And that was like, I mean, this is many, many years back and probably wouldn't be so shocking anymore. And not only there, like maybe other places here. I mean, not in winter. I take your point.
I would like to ask Gabi, Anna, how does your cultural and ethnic backgrounds affect your fashion sense, designing and imagining dress? So if you can talk about your work.
Well, I was born in a suburb of Detroit, so every influence of Chinese culture was not the natural inclination. My parents were very, very westernized. They were educated in Europe. We never had Chinese furniture, Chinese artifacts. So I learned Chinese culture just through film and travel. So I think I'm more a product of pop culture, and I have like a inclination towards like subculture. So I think that that's more my influence. Maybe my color sense is very oriental, and that's what makes me very successful in Asia. But I think that somewhere, I think I represent a globalized Asian person, and I think that's, again, like another popularity that happened in Asia.
Gabi.
Well, I grew up half of my life in Beirut, so, and I went to French schools, and then I went to American college, and so there was a lot of like influence from European kind of, BCBG culture, which kind of imitated American culture in the 50s, and, or waspy culture, we would say. But then, coming to America, I felt like American style was the, predominant style in the world. But it was based on a European background, which came, from the transformation of power from Europe to America in World War I, World War II. So you really could see that, culture was following the first country in the world, which is America. So that's why I chose to be in New York versus to be in Paris, because I felt it was more interesting to be in the center of culture if I had the chance. And New York was more, kind of in touch with that than a city like Paris, because when we went back to Paris, I always found that Parisians had the tendency to follow New York culture or American culture, which was very interesting. As a Middle Easterner, I would say. But I'm not really Middle Easterner. I don't know where I'm come from.
So there is then an attraction to a particular city then.
Yeah,
I think in this globalized, so this uniforming kind of world. I mean,
I think everybody is interested in culture, and everybody's interested in the highest culture. And I think the highest city in terms of culture is New York. It's not actually Paris. Because if you look at the people living in New York from all kinds of fields, and you look at the people living in Paris from all kinds of fields, for me, I find more interesting people in terms of open mind, I would say, towards future ideas and new possibilities.
In New York?
Yeah.
I myself don't know about people's interest in culture, but I know that my own interest is in, as is Anna's, largely in subculture, and certainly New York at a census level is the most plural city you can come up with, and it also, for a long, long time, not so much now, was really a place where subcultures could thrive. So that would be like attractive to, I think, to any creative person. And in consequence of that, in my own view, we were great exporters. We, New York as a city, were great exporters of culture, and also, not incidentally, of fashion. To think of the period when the New York Dolls were, and I guess I can pretend I don't remember when people dressed up for airplanes, but I do. And I remember also the New York Dolls, and the New York Dolls just like staggering around downtown in that kind of thing that now we're on like the third generation of reviving glam rock or what have you. But that was just one of, I worked for Andy Warhol, thinking of those people, just being the people that are around. It's not a special group, just one of all the groups that are, a special group, I admit, but around, just very, and it isn't to say that there isn't a lot of it still, but it seems, the city seems much, for all its ethnic and cultural plurality, it doesn't seem as conducive to...
It got yuppified.
I don't know,
you used to see Johnny Thunders coming and going every day.
Right.
Now you don't see that anymore. You
could see him pulling over to the side,
Wall
puking
Street
in a doorway. And
That's true.
So what would you say is new in New York now? This
I think definitely
scene.
The political situation, the fact that we have Obama as a president opens up all kinds of possibilities. It's not New York as a city, but America as a country all of a sudden opens up all these doors, all these opportunities and possibilities to the world to see it the other way around. So now all of a sudden, to be prejudiced, you can be, you're black as prejudice. You're not white as prejudice. So it's a whole different kind of thing, which is kind of dangerous too. But I think it gives a certain support of the under cultures or the under races to have a certain voice, and that's really wonderful, I think. But I mean, New York was always like this, but it highlights it even more like that now.
But I think with this economic crisis, I mean, I certainly notice it happening in the garment center where I work, where 6 months ago we were afraid that it was a disappearing area of town. And I think that with the economic crisis, the landlords are not able to convert that area now, that they cannot get the financing or people interested in converting every single manufacturing building into a luxury hotel. So I'm hoping that that's going to generate a lot more creativity, open up chances for new designers, new companies, to really be able to manufacture still here in New York, where it was almost an impossibility 6 months ago to even think about it, that everything was going to be gone.
Yeah, because
the flea market
think
was
this
going
is
to be
one of
gone.
the big issues,
That's
right?
right.
I mean,
It
this
is the
idea
issue.
of...
I mean, and it's always a real estate story in New York. And, the New York that I'm describing of the dolls or whatever, the Warhol people, it was, where people had a $75 a month apartment. So that's, that's long gone. And I think that the economic crisis is going to retard this transformation, but I don't think it's going to really stop it. And that is a part, ultimately, I think, of the movement away from New York, which is somewhat inevitable. Because when you saw Berlin happen, Berlin is not the most amenable city in a lot of ways, but there was lots of space and cheap rents.
Right.
And I knew so many artists who left here, and designers and actors, and also left Los Angeles, just because you could live a life there, and you could live a creative life there in a way that I don't think is terribly possible here.
Is this in a sort of a contradiction with what this idea of the new and vibrant possibility? What do you think?
I feel like you're not going to stifle people, and it is still an extremely attractive place to be, and it is as a forum of ideas. There's not a better one. I mean, it is still, it's a media city, and it's a substantially a fashion city. These are huge industries here, and so people are going to be attracted to this place, regardless of the difficulties. But they are difficult, and they make it harder to get off the ground, and to live a life unsupported by parents, basically. You couldn't really, I mean, all those Warhol people, I mean, I have to say most of them were on welfare, but...
Yeah.
But you said something 6 months ago?
Well, before the last big crash of the economy, that was our big fear, that we weren't going to be able to have an area that we could afford to keep our offices, showrooms. My contractors could not get leases. The landlords were handing out maybe 6-month or 1-year leases at that point. And now suddenly they realize they're not going to be able to convert their buildings. So there's a big change in how people are viewing their real estate.
Yeah, that's true.
Also in different areas in Manhattan, the traditional garment, the 7th Avenue really is not...
Yeah, I think it's all over in Manhattan.
I'm sorry?
I mean, it's insane. I mean, there's a whole kind of new kind of open ground for people to come in. And I find
your studio is in
Chinatown. I find a lot of people from Europe interested to come here now. There's open spaces and cheap rents. So New York is very attractive all of a sudden to outsiders. There's a lot of people that move to Williamsburg, but then it's open to new people to come in all of a sudden. So it's just a matter of the government saying, okay, you can now you can come in.
Do you think, I asked the after 9/11, there were other big changes in terms of fashion in New York?
I think so, yeah. I think there was a lot of, I mean, you can talk about conservative regime and, the fashion, I think in between 96 and 2001 in New York was very experimental, and there was all this openness to new ideas. And as soon as 9/11 happened, this was all shut off, completely kind of shut off, and there was a lot of people that I know that went out of business, and there was all these new people coming in. But all of a sudden, American fashion exploded, because American fashion kind of fits more to that kind of 50s proper conservative classical American look. And there was a lot of space for all these designers to bloom. But experimentation was not allowed. And that's what I can say from my experience.
Perspective. And Anna?
I see a similarity right now, but I think this is much more extreme because it involves so much more than what it did then. I think there's a huge cultural shift that's going on. I think, again, going back to this whole internet culture, I know that in Japan, where I've had a lot of success, there was generation after generation of consumers. The customer was trained to do all your research. All the magazines had so much information, and you would spend all your leisure time looking up what you were going to buy next with your paycheck. And then you would go out and buy fiercely and whatever it is that you wanted, because there was a lot of expendable income. A lot of young people lived at home with their parents. The new generation doesn't feel the same confidence about their future. They're not going to have a job for life. Their social security system is failing. So they're all saving and all really, really buying very, very carefully, rather than buying 3 things at once. Maybe they'll buy 1 thing a season. So I think there's a big cultural shift going on.
Would you like to add?
I guess my observation is post 9/11 there was a kind of a chastening, and everybody was in a state of kind of prolonged mourning, without a sense of what to do that was appropriate, because it seemed really, the kind of super excited consuming that had been going on before that seemed really inappropriate to the moment. But it wasn't it wasn't a macroeconomic event, as this is. It was mainly located in New York, although the entire culture was, obviously involved. So I think now, just as you say, there are all of these shifts. In Japan, it occurs to me that the generation of super consumers was standing on the shoulders of a generation of post-war rebuilding people. It was all the salarymen who basically sacrificed their lives, and having done so, to rebuild the country, and having done so, were, built of themselves a platform for their children to consume and consume. And this has somewhat the effect that, I won't say a war, it's not that extreme, but it's a very big event, the economic crisis. And I feel as if that chastening is going to reconfigure the way, it has already. Everybody here has rethought buying and getting and spending. Everybody has. And I think that the way that's what's compelling to me is how that's going to affect creativity. Will people, because you see little things like people are repurposing, or, there's some interesting projects where people are, there was this Joe Good project that they were doing at Goodwill in San Francisco, where you would buy, it's ongoing, and the guy who runs Joe Boxer was the money behind this, and you would go to Goodwill and you'd buy some kind of Goodwill thing, and there were designers who were set up there in like a little mini atelier, and they would repurpose the clothes for you. So I can see this being like positive in a way, in that way, rather than just kind of crazy bag mania. And I don't know if that's exactly to your point.
But fashion and media cannot be separated, so I guess I would like to ask how do the media impact, on what is in and out, what is desirable or not. So fashion journalism, blogs, music, videos, internet. So
unfortunately, it guides it. I think that's the only way people know what's going on. But I find that through the internet, there's been much more personal kind of bloggers that are saying things that the usual kind of fashion critics would not actually, say. And there's a lot of people listening to them because they're a whole different point of view.
The bloggers.
Yeah, because all of a sudden it's becoming a more popular kind of point of view versus, an elitist point of view. And I think for me it's very interesting to see the response to that, where, what is beautiful, what is stylish, what is, advanced, and all of these things. And all of a sudden the, establishment kind of point of view versus the individual point of view might, be in challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the immediacy of information it is making everything like so extreme and in your face. Like every time there's a catastrophe, it's a huge catastrophe. And every time, it just seems like every news event is so impactful now because there's such media saturation. As you were talking about, like with the internet, with the blogging, I mean, yes, maybe that's the underground of today, but also there's, to me, a lot of misinformation too. Like people that just say anything. And then because it's written, does that mean it's correct, it's true, it's viable? That's the part that's a little questionable. There's no standard yet for that. And that's the part that
I love that actually, because it's very interesting, because who knows who's saying, what is true and what is not true. I mean, you don't know if CNN is saying the truth.
That's true.
You're going to find out from the person that was on the field. But are they saying the truth also? So it's a very interesting place.
For me, the funny thing about blogging, though, actually, I mean, and I obviously have a professional stake in saying this, and it's like, great, everybody have an opinion, God bless. But fashion's an image language. And that's where I think like the internet is really having its most potent effect. And I was thinking about this in writing a piece right now about Adam Lambert, the American Idol contestant. And when you look at this guy, you can actually draw whatever, because there's a lot of internet hubbub right now, but is he gay or is he not gay or whatever? And you can just sort of draw a line backward from that look. Is it, to Pete Wentz, to Pete Wentz emo boys, and back and back and back. And the way that this information travels across, it just can't be stopped. It isn't there isn't a cultural elite that owns the decision about who knows who and who is what. Yeah. And that for me has a really potent effect on fashion, on everything, but not least on fashion. Because that guy is not really legible as one thing. And people are trying, Bill O'Reilly's tearing his hair out. And, can America stand this?
I've been kind of very interested in terms of like that there's a certain kind of thing about everybody is beautiful and everybody can identify beauty. So when something is beautiful, whether it's criticized as bad or good, it comes through. And that's kind of like where the internet just raises up the issues of these things. But I think whatever is highlighted has to be paid attention to. And that's how I look at it. Like whatever has interest or whatever makes noise should be looked at. That's how I look at it.
Agreed.
Just to conclude our discussion, so then you think fashion critics are influential? Are they? I'll ask Guy.
I can say that fashion critics can really piss people off. I don't know if that's influence.
No, they're very influential, I think.
They are?
Yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, because they really know. They really know their thing, but they don't know other things. So.
Like what?
I mean, you can know classical fashion, but you can. You might not know underground fashion. So it's very hard to find somebody that knows classical fashion and underground fashion and culture.
You could probably say this of all the critical disciplines. Like they're all being dismantled right now. Like nobody, it's there just isn't an organized cultural elite anymore. They just, So all the critical disciplines are having to be kind of taken apart and put back together to reflect the super democratized world that you referenced in your introduction.
And you think that fashion journalism also can be...
Well, I think, I mean, it's very interesting today to look at it more from an audience point of view versus the, the critic, and see what the audience is saying. That's why all, websites have comments. I mean, I'm interested to see the comments versus to see what the people are saying, just to know what the comments are.
More than the critics?
Yeah, I think it's more interesting. I mean, that's how I look at it.
But I'm not primarily a critic, so I don't really feel like my feelings are hurt. But I can say, like, for example, sometime back when this guy that I know started the site, The Sartorialist, which I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with, and I was like, this is very interesting, and it's sort of, there's a continuum of that kind of thing, starting with Nadar and people on the street and Bill Cunningham and whatever. But the thing that really was like fascinating to me about this was that when you read the strings, there was this immensely narrative thing going on where people would look at a picture of you and they would have this whole idea of who you were. And then they would say, oh, you look obviously like such and such a person. And then the other one would be, oh, no, he's like, this scarf is that way. And it was this level of emotional connection that's, to me, really compelling. And it actually, in the end, is more interesting than any critical declaration or proclamation. It's sort of, what is that story? What is the story people are trying to tell themselves and each other about a picture of a total stranger?
Well, I think, again, like, the way you dress is the way you are. So the only way you can tell if you're right on or not, if you're truthful to yourself, is the audience. So if you're walking on the street and people have a good response to you, then you understand that you're okay. But if they don't, then... I mean, you can never know, I think.
Right. So we need the gaze of the other.
You need the audience.
All this,
the audience can tell you.
Right. Why don't, do we have a few minutes for questions, Andrea? I am checking. So why don't we have 10 minutes, or we have 10 minutes? Would you take questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for this. That will,
so cute.
are there any questions? Yes.
When I decided I wanted to be a fashion designer, I didn't know what it was. I just saw something on television. I thought, oh, this looks good. And I think that my whole childhood and teenage years were spent figuring out what a fashion designer was. So I just tried to learn as much as I could, read Vogue magazine, saved all these pictures, and read somewhere about two young ladies that graduated from Parsons and went to Paris, and Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton opened a boutique for them, so I thought, oh, I have to go to Parsons. That was how my mind worked. I think along the way, especially once I started working, I learned the craft, and of course, I developed heroes and looked to different designers. I think Norma Kamali and Betsy Johnson were some of my favorites in the beginning. Of course, I did my history lessons and learned about Coco Chanel and Poiret, and so I think that that's why you see so much of my fashion influenced by my heroes. But I think that of course, looking back, I see that the whole business had changed with women coming into power. I wasn't really conscious of it then because I only thought of it myself getting a job. I didn't really think of it as like there was this whole movement, but looking back, I can see that. I think that you really aren't always aware of doing things consciously, only looking back on it, then you see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I make a quick comment, just in terms of role models, because it wasn't mentioned before. Anna this will be this year's recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the CFDA, so she is herself a role model.
Any other questions?
Could I just ask if there are other questions? Could people come up to the mics, please, and just so that everybody can hear? There are mics on both sides. So we've been having this really great conversation about fashion, fascinating, really exciting. But I'm interested to hear a little bit about what the panel has to think about or thinks about the role of models in the popularization of fashion or the globalization of fashion, or at what point, I mean, were models some part of this process, or was it just the internet?
I think it changes all the time. I think that along with fashion, the role of the model has changed.
Yeah.
I think, when I started doing shows, it was the supermodels, and fashion was really dictated by the supermodels. Then we went through the waif, and now I think fashion is very celebrity-driven. So it shifts along with fashion. I mean, I think.
But it's worth knowing that the Metropolitan Museum of Art's next big show, the Costume Institute of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is called Model Has Muse. And it looks at exactly that, starting from the beginning almost of photography, and certainly of fashion photography. So without any doubt, the extent to which models reflect what's happening in terms of idealized women in the culture, it obviously is super influential, mirroring back to people what beauty is at any time. As Anna says, waifs or this or that, or glamazons, or right now it's a funny thing model-wise because the women are as neutral and kind of almost non-existent as possible. They're intended to get out of the way of the clothes. I mean, designers are very consciously, it's kind of like the non-woman.
I would like to ask Mr. Trebay about what you said about repurposing the clothing in the thrift shops. Can you provide one example of what a designer would do with a specific piece of clothing? For example, if someone wanted to buy your jacket and repurpose it, what would the designer do with it?
I mean, what do they do in that place?
Yeah, like
they'll
example.
They'll take two dresses and they'll take the bodice off of one and sew a jacket to the skirt part of a dress or something like that. And I mean, they do whatever they do creatively, but they're quite adventurous, which they're able to be because the garment's already made, the garment's plural, and they're in a Goodwill, so it's not going to break the bank for anybody. And to me that's exciting because for a variety of reasons, green reasons and adventurousness reasons.
I think.
Quick question. I was wondering, I guess you talked a lot about urban spaces and specifically New York, and I was wondering if you felt, and I guess some of you might have a more historical perspective on it, that experimental fashion in New York as a particularly difficult space vis-a-vis other city. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is for sure. This city is built on business, and if you're not successful in business, it's very hard to be creative. So if your product doesn't make sense in business, then there's nobody to support you. So, I mean, that's what we've been going through. And I think it's more interesting than going to Paris and having all the support you want in creativity. It's much more challenging in terms of making sense from creativity to business.
I mean, I think that it's all a matter of economics. I think that as we were talking about, like in the 70s and even into the early 80s, New York was a very affordable place for an underground to happen. There was lots of creativity. Apartments were not expensive. People could start businesses. It's a different time now, and the economics don't allow for that. So that's why you see pockets of creativity in, let's say, other urban centers like Seattle, Atlanta, like there's a music center, Austin in Texas. You know, it had to shift because people couldn't come to New York to start out. You had to make a certain amount of money to live here.
And creative people always have to go where the rents are cheap. I mean, that's the bottom line, and they just are. You know, it's been a while here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sure, Linda. I think this is the last question.
I think there's
sorry.
Go ahead.
So
Maybe
the last two questions. Yes. Sorry.
It's okay. I sort of as a follow-up, because the talk about rent and space and economy and sort of the spatial politics that affect not just designers, but artists, writers, actors, especially dancers. One of the questions I have about the interest in subculture and the evacuation of subculture in New York is about collaboration, and specifically for Mr. Asfour, what the role of collaboration is in perhaps precipitating a subculture that becomes the ground for making things.
Well, I mean, my basis is collaboration. I collaborate with two partners that I think that there was no way that we could survive without collaborating. And I think that's the way of the future, because all of a sudden you're having an open mind to another point of view that will make your point of view more rich and more, valid. So I think, in a situation like this where companies have to collaborate, there's all of a sudden, a richness of product.
I can say you've really identified something interesting in the sense that what we've been talking about throughout the evening in a funny way has to do with the movement away from cultural, kind of, I don't want to say hegemonies, but, cultural dictatorship to cultural collaboration as a necessary survival tool.
Mm-hmm.
My question actually follows. It sort of. Did you have something?
No, I'm just
follows on that in terms of whom you think you're making clothes for, because fashion has always traded on this balance between everybody wanting to be unique and nobody wanting to be odd person out, wanting to feel that you're in the know and at the same time unique. That balance and the way it's played out changes, but I'm curious how...
I think the most honest thing you can do is make clothing for yourself first.
That's the question, was who do you
because
make
that's
it for?
the filter, you make it for yourself, you test it out first, and you approve it yourself. And then you let it out for whoever wants it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically you're doing it for yourself. And I think that's the most kind of precise way you can, for me, I think that's how, because it's very difficult to understand somebody else's body. It's very easy to know your own body, how it moves, when it's sitting, when it's standing, when it's dancing, when it's sleeping, then you can really understand its, patterns and its behavior.
But another model would be to make for a muse, let's say.
Yeah, then it's, I think it's, for me, it doesn't make sense so much. That's how I look at it.
No, that's really interesting.
I think that I've sort of built a brand where I have like catchphrases that kind of define my brand. Everyone says it's very girly, very feminine, but then there's like a hard edge to it where there's like a rock influence or kind of like good girl, bad girl sort of ambiguity. And I think that I design more for a spirit of woman, not a certain age group. And I think that's why so many different people can relate to it. I think that, one of the things I always say is that every tube of lipstick has to represent the same fantasy as an Anna Sui dress. Because not everyone can fit the Anna Sui dress into their budget or their lifestyle, but they can get the same excitement, same fantasy in the lipstick. And that's kind of how I look at design.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The audience are here.